sent.
All set. Back to you being the host. You can share your screen if you'd like, or
Okay.
even you can share your screen after you guys do the introductions. That way, are we on speaker view?
Both options suit me. I don't mind.
I think we're going to do speaker view, and then in the next couple of minutes, I think Maria is going to take us on broadcast, so that way more people can come in. And then you guys will start like 5 minutes after. So this is the last you will hear of me. I want to thank you again for doing this. I'm grateful for the second time for and publishing in our newsletter in the past. So I consider you to be a major supporter of our effort here. So anything that we can do to bring Lebanon closer to Boston, it's our pleasure.
Thank you, Doctor. It's my pleasure as well.
Thank you.
Perfect. So I should be all set, right, Van Vakis?
Yes, Mujahid.
Okay, so what time do you want me to broadcast?
You can broadcast in 2 minutes at 2 o'clock exactly. And then you can start at 2:05.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
So we will get started momentarily, just waiting for a couple minutes for people to come in. Okay, so we're gonna start. So hello everyone. My name is Maria Mujahid. I am a student at Emmanuel College, majoring in political science, and I would like to welcome you to the summer 2020 Eastern Mediterranean Security Conference. Emmanuel College and the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies since 2012 has been organizing a 4-week Eastern Mediterranean Security Studies program for students and young academics interested in the interaction of democracy, energy, geopolitics, and security in the region. This competitive program has allowed students and participants to study and experience firsthand the importance of the region that has been a cultural, economic, and geopolitical vortex since antiquity. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic is yet another conditionality that has altered the dimensions of security and complexity of the area. Since travel in the region is prohibited this summer, the IEMS, in cooperation with the Konstantin G. Karamanlis Chair in Hellenic and European Studies and the Institute of International Relations, will be hosting a 1-week program of focused lectures, presentations, and panel discussions. The 1-week program will bring experts from the region in 2 sets of lectures aimed at assessing democracy, energy, and geopolitics, and on the role of leadership, diplomacy, and statecraft in this changing security environment of the Eastern Mediterranean. Our presenters this week have come from different countries of the region as well as backgrounds. We have a mixture of policymakers, diplomats, and academics. The full program is available once you register for the conference. And without further ado, today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Mr. Sara Gebrael. She is a fundraising coordinator at the Lebanese Transparency Association. She is currently at the Lebanese American University working to obtain a master's in migration studies, and she has been a part of the demonstrations in Lebanon since last fall. But just before turning the microphone over to our speaker, I wanted to let everybody know that I will act as the host of the event and I will guide the Q&A, which will follow the 25 to 30-minute presentation. The duration of our program will be 1 hour and 30 minutes. I would like to ask you all to please turn off your microphones and to use either the chat or to raise your hand for questions or the Q&A box. We will try to answer all questions, and it's nice to have all of you here, and I hope that we have a very productive presentation and discussion. Ms. Sara Gebrael, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for this nice presentation, and thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Sara Gebrael. I'm a 24 years old Lebanese young woman, and I'm currently working in the Lebanese Transparency Association. We are the national chapter of Transparency International, and we're working on everything related to anti-corruption, a very hot topic in Lebanon. So it's very nice to see that people from across our borders are interested in what's happening in the country. So I've prepared a very brief presentation which will take us through what's happening in the country. So I'm going to be sharing my screen now. Just let me know if you can see it clearly. It's okay to start?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So when we want to talk about Lebanon and what's happening today between the COVID-19 pandemic, the socioeconomic and political unrest, we can really qualify the whole situation as a perfect storm. And we can really place Lebanon at a crossroad that would either take us somewhere better or somewhere worse. Because usually when change is about to happen, we always have this risk that we need to take into account. But if we really want to put Lebanon in a nutshell currently, it is close to a certain chaos that I will try to really explain in this presentation. So what we're going to do is that we are going to start by seeing how Lebanon is looking today on different levels. What are the current problems, the current crises, and what is really happening on the ground. And then we're gonna shift backwards to why this is all happening. What are the causes of whatever crisis this country is going through? What are the different factors that compiled and led us to the situation we are in today? And then we're gonna fast forward to what's next. So are there any solutions? If yes, are they challenging? What are the different options that we have as Lebanese and as a country. Now, before I start, I would like to point out that I will be talking about different political, economic issues. And myself, I'm not an expert in every single topic that I am going to be exposing. So if you have any questions at the end of the presentation, I will be open to answer to the extent of my knowledge and my experience, every question you have. I will also be leaving my email by the end of the presentation. So if you have any further question, you can send them through email, and I will be referring you to people who can give you correct and very specific and scientific answers, specifically in terms of economics and finance. So let's start. Lebanon today. So we're going to begin with a general overview. I think most of you have heard that since October 2019, demonstrations have been taking place and protests have been taking place in Lebanon, and they've been going on for months until the COVID-19 pandemic struck the country here as well, and we had to go into lockdown and quarantine. So this has put a hold on the protests that were ongoing, and it was happening across all Lebanon for different reasons that we are going to go through in a bit. But now that the pandemic quarantine is dissipating, that people are really trying to, despite the fact that we are really expecting a second wave of the virus, that people are starting to go back to their works and to their lives. We are going back to more popular unrest, and we will see why. So months of political unrest have led the financial and economic situation to worsen. Today, since mid-October till today, more than 220,000 jobs in the private sector have been shed. A lot of young people are losing their jobs. Companies are shutting down. Startup businesses are really they are forced to actually close their doors, and even international firms and international companies are either relocating or they are shutting down and keeping the minimum staff they can in the country. Lebanon has recently defaulted with the announcement of its government of its inability to repay its sovereign debt as well as pay for essential imports. So we are really facing a social crisis on the local level and a very dire economic crisis that is really worsening by the day. The Lebanese pound has devaluated and has lost more than 50% of its value compared to the US dollars. So in a nutshell, it is a very messy situation and highly challenging. To put numbers on what I just said, Lebanon's public debt stands at more than $90 billion of debt, equivalent to roughly 170% of the country's gross domestic product. This sets Lebanon as the third most indebted country in the world. And we've been seeing this coming for a while now. If you go back to reading articles regarding Lebanon's economy, you'd see that articles dating and studies dating from 2017, 2018 onwards, and even before, were really expecting this situation to arrive at one point or the other. And while a lot of opinions state that the protests that started in October 17, 2019 were main contributors of the main contributor of the crisis we are going through today, it is in fact one of the repercussions or the manifestations on the ground of what the Lebanese people have been going through throughout the last couple of years. So we didn't reach $90 billion of debt in 2 months. We've been compiling that's due to different factors that I will be explaining soon enough to reach the situation we are in today. So a lot of studies are comparing us to other countries who are going through default debt, socioeconomic crisis, and so on. And we've yet to see what's more to come on this level. So 27% of the Lebanese people are officially poor, and the number is expected to grow. In fact, just like I stated before, with more than 37% of the Lebanese youth losing under 35, being under 35 years old, becoming unemployed, either losing their jobs or not finding any jobs at all. And we have huge numbers that graduate from Lebanese universities on a yearly basis. And the majority of them really fail at finding opportunities that suit their profiles, that suit their qualifications in the country. So this is strictly linked also to why a lot of Lebanese young people leave the country, and it leads to the brain drain that Lebanon has been witnessing for a lot of years now. It's nothing new, but what's happening now is that it's worsening. And with the COVID-19 limiting a bit the economic wheel in every country in the world, in Lebanon it has worsened due to the piling up of deficit that the country has been going through lately. Another reality is that the infrastructure in the country is poor. Lebanese people suffer daily from power cuts and very expensive private generation to fill the gaps. Simply put, the Lebanese electricity sector accounts to more than 40% of the public debt in Lebanon. So this is one of the main struggles of the Lebanese people. And while our needs go around 3,000 megawatts, what our current infrastructure can provide is not even half of the capacity. This is what of the demand side. So this is why a lot of all Lebanese people are obliged to go to generators owned by cartels and mafias that are usually politically supported in order to get electricity to their homes on a 24/7 basis. And this forces the Lebanese people to pay more money on things that should be their right in general, the minimum right acquired in order to live a dignified life. And the state-owned mobile operators are expensive. So you can really see the struggles piling up from the smallest thing like a cell phone and your right for communication and to have a proper communication system, to electricity and water and even public education, because the education sector in Lebanon on the public level hasn't been at its best for a long time now. And now with the economic crisis that is really striking hard in the country, the educational system on the private sector, on the private level, is also suffering. And a lot of private schools are forced to shut their doors now for the next fall. It's very uncertain how things are going to go for high schools in Lebanon. And lately we've been witnessing very big universities such as the American University of Beirut being forced to really fire more than 1,000 employees from their facilities. So In a nutshell, this is what's happening really concretely on the ground. So if you read daily news about Lebanon, you would read about the economic crisis, the educational level crisis, health, etc. It's per sector, it's everywhere, and it's really suffocating the country. On the political level, I'm going to take you through a bit of an introduction to what Lebanon system is based on, and to get you to the point of today. Most of our problems in the countries are politically based. So basically, a lot of things, a lot of reforms, a lot of improvement is getting restricted due to political interference. So Lebanon is not led by one political party that constitutes the majority in the country. In fact, it is led by a number of leaders and parties that sway over the country's various sectarian groups. Because Lebanon is a multi-sectarian society. We have more than 18 sects, and 18 of them are officially recognized, and they've been and they are represented, every sect is represented politically in the Lebanese parliament and on all levels of employment in the public sphere. And the problem is that the majority of the leaders we have in Lebanon today were part of the Lebanese civil war, which ravaged the country from 1975 to 1990. And they've been getting recycled in every parliamentary election. If not the same leader, their son or one of their family members would take their place. So it's the same way of thinking, the same approach to things, which hasn't been producing any good results ever since the end of the civil war till today. And positions in Lebanon are apportioned by quotas among the 18 officially recognized sects. So the parliament is half Christian and half Muslim, and the prime minister must be a Sunni Muslim, the president a Maronite Christian, and the speaker of parliament a Shiite, so that they would guarantee the representation of all sects, especially after the civil war, which was really fueled by sectarian feuds and conflicts. So Lebanon is fractured by politics internally, because every party, they rarely find consensus, they rarely agree on anything, and they mostly like to simply put, limit one another from improving in order to get their best interest. And in addition to that, we are mostly vulnerable to foreign interference that has long fueled domestic crises. So Lebanon's strategic positioning in the region, who's part of the Mediterranean and very close to the West, and at the same time part of the Arab world, and in the middle of a very conflicted region, has been a strategic place for international and foreign interference and strategies. And this has been implemented and has been present across all the history of Lebanon since its early beginnings, before it became a nation state, till today. So if somebody is interested enough to check the Lebanese history, you can always find this trend repeating itself in several crucial points in the history of the country. So today, many of the political conflicts have reflected the tensions between the two most important blocs in the Middle East, and that everything related to politics in the Middle East revolve around, which means between Iran, which backs the Shiite group Hezbollah on the one hand, and the US allied Gulf Arab states and Saudi Arabia, which have backed Hariri on the other. So basically you have the two duality between the Shia and the Sunni, and then you have the Christian parties that are divided upon themselves according to either pro-West or pro-East. And now with the whole economic crisis issue, we are really debating whether Lebanon should move forward towards the West and and abide by the US policies, and we'll get eventually to the to the IMF part, and then in other words, reform according to Western policies, or go forward with the Eastern powers of Iran and their allies. So this is the political and general overview of Lebanon today. But how did we get here in the first place? how and why did Lebanon get to this crisis, regardless of the fact of foreign interference and all the factors that are related to exterior factors. I'm going to take you a bit into the micro of the Lebanese situation. What are the factors that contributed to us getting to this reality? So if I thought of putting three big headlines, and in which we're going to dive into their details and give you a general overview in their regards. Corruption, absence of good governance, and flawed economy. And all three factors are interlinked. So one does not exist without the other, and they are and they overlap in on different points. So on the corruption level, Lebanon has very high rates of corruption ever since the end of the civil war. There were never any implemented reform that tackled the corrupt spirit that comes from, or the corrupt culture that results of armed conflicts. Instead, it has been regenerated in different forms and colors and approaches and methods. So the Corruption Perception Index, which Transparency International launches every year on an international level, ranks Lebanon as country 37 over 180 on the corruption scale, with a score of 28 over 100. So if you actually check this index, you can perceive that Lebanon is in very vivid red color, signaling its very high levels of corruption. And another index also shows that the Global Corruption Barometer, which is a survey-based index, which goes every year almost, and they interview people within the country to really find the perceptions that lead to either if this country is actually evolving on the corruption level or on the still reproducing the same approach to this issue. 68% of the Lebanese people said that in 2019 they thought that corruption has increased, and 41% admit to have had to pay a bribe in the previous 12 months. And this is something very normal in the Lebanese situation, because corruption in Lebanon is systemic. It is present within the system, within every sector of the system. You find corruption on the public level, on the political parties levels, on the CSOs sometimes even, in the private sector. There is always this trend and these factors and indicators that show that that there are corrupt procedures taking place and corrupt mechanisms taking place in the country. And it is deeply embedded in the public and private sphere, to a point where there is a psychological approach to understanding corruption where it becomes cultural. So it is very normal for a Lebanese person who needs to get some official papers from a public institution in Beirut, for example, to take into consideration that I'm going to have to pay a bribe in order to get what is supposed to come to me freely, which is my right as a citizen. So this is one point. A second point, and when we talk about corruption in Lebanon, is that we have a lot of policies and laws, and CSOs are currently really working towards reforming a lot of them, and some of them have been amended on the legislative levels. However, it is not being implemented. We have a lot of laws, just such as the right to access to information, that is not being implemented. And to which the citizens are not even aware of their existence. So CSOs have to really to implement projects to raise awareness regarding anti-corruption mechanisms. Now, ever since the October 17th protests, anti-corruption has been rising as a hot topic in Lebanon, and people are starting to develop an interest toward this issue and to understand really how crucial and important it is, because it actually is linked and impacts directly on the good governance and on the governance system of Lebanon. How does it impact governance? I'm going to explain that here, and we're going to see that later on in a bit as well. The problem is that over the years, a lot of governments that has succeeded one another, because in Lebanon we always have a very unstable political situation, which really requires governments to continuously. They rarely finish their mandates, and they are always regenerating into new ones. Okay, but all of them have borrowed heavily from domestic and foreign lenders. We've been taking loans from international donors and countries, etc., in huge amounts. And instead of really using these loans in order to sustain the country or build infrastructure, etc., due to the corruption that is present in the system and in the government and everywhere in the country, those loans were not rightfully invested, which led us to the fact that we couldn't pay them back because the investment was not rightfully placed. We didn't win as a state productive income out of it, okay, and we couldn't pay again. And on a second note, when foreign lenders saw that what was happening in Lebanon, that a lot of money is being pumped into the country, but not a single rightfully implemented project is being settled or is being implemented, they lost trust in the governments. So this is why right now it is very difficult for Lebanon to get extra or additional money or donations or loans even, because due to the lack of trust that foreign lenders have developed towards the country. And on the governance level, around 50% of the state revenue goes to paying off the debt, since it is deeply indebted. And at the same time, a major chunk is used to pay salaries of government employees. And why is it such an important problem? Because in Lebanon, when there are elections, for example, whoever is running for election tries to bribe people into voting for them by promising them to employ their children or their freshly graduate youth in the families in the public sector. So we have a huge amount of employees in the sector, and not all of them are actually working. So not some of them their contracts have expired without any legal renewal, and among different forms of waste. And these amounts of money are going into places that cannot be invested in. So there is no sustainable growth on the administrative level, and this is why Lebanon is in high need of administrative reform. And with all these factors, we are left with very little for productive investments in sectors such as health and education. We really find any sustainable action plan set in one ministry or the other in order to really work and move forward with the sector they are dealing with, such as the electricity, the power sector, the educational sector, the health sector, etc. There are absence of mechanisms that ensure sustainability, and the political instabilities limit progress. For example, in Lebanon, administration's archiving, this is a very simple thing. The archiving of data is not efficient. It is not right, and sometimes it's not even there. So basically, when you have governments changing one after the other, since every minister belongs to one political party that is mostly the opposite to the previous one, they do not build up on progress. They just restart from scratch with new strategies and with new spendings, and thus we rarely have any tangible outcome of all the strategies and action plans they tell people about when they come out in public and they tell about their achievements. There is an absence of proper public budget processes. So Lebanon has been suffering from an quasi absence of public budget for the government. Since the Lebanese war, we had several years where there was no budget in the first place, and there was no at the end of every year, when you just check the costs, where we spent, where did you underspend or overspend, we didn't have any data on this matter. And a couple of years back, the government and the parliament started to really and with the pressure of the NGOs that tackled this point, they started to re-kick the process of actually having a budget for the government in general, but still it was highly flawed, and a lot of reforms were supposed to take place, and to move it and to advance it into what budgets are supposed to look like on a state level nowadays. We have a lot of political feuds which often restrict consensus. So if the government has to take a decision on a matter of health, political interference may obstruct the implementation of such a decision. So we always have those political nature problems and conflicts between one party and the other, between one decision maker and the other, and thus they veto each other. And since we're a consensual democracy, if there is no consensus, we do not implement anything. So it's like a vicious circle of inefficiency. We have a lack of implementation of transparency guidelines that ensure good governance. For example, Lebanon has ratified and has been part of the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention for Anti-Corruption. In this convention, there are guidelines that every country that ratified this convention should stick to and take part in and implement. In Lebanon, this has been a very, very slow process. And it's only now with the protests that there is a bit of populism, of a populistic approach to these points. So you have a lot of political parties that are trying to nowadays present new bills and new laws that promote transparency and anti-corruption, etc. However, there are a lot of loopholes within the laws, and even once implemented, as I already mentioned, they are rarely, once they pass through the parliament and they become legal, they are rarely implemented. And finally, dependency of foreign powers. Again, we are always subject to, specifically with the presence of for example, the Hezbollah party, which really causes huge debates on the national and international scene. We are always dependent of foreign powers, of, for example, sanctions that get imposed on Lebanon due to different factors. So it is kind of a very vicious circle that is full of loopholes and that really needs reform on all levels. Now on the economic level, that and this is an issue that the Lebanese people have been suffering for the last couple of months. It is actually the problem with the devaluation of the Lebanese pound and the scarcity of dollars in the market. So Riyad Saleh has been the head of Banque du Liban since 1993. And under this governor, the central bank pursued a policy of high interest rates for years, making it easier for the government to borrow money. So in Lebanon, we are not a production-based economy. We are a service-based economy. We import. We have to really import most of the goods that we consume in Lebanon. And even when we want to produce something locally, a lot of the goods that we need to actually produce are imported. So we are always in huge needs of dollars. And to attract investors and to attract the remittances, the economic remittances of the Lebanese diaspora, the central bank in Lebanon has adopted a high interest rate policy. So you get to put your money in your investment in Lebanon, and you get very high rates, and then you maximize profit. And this is why we get money into the country. And thus Lebanon was really highly dependent of the banking sector and of everything remitting from outside. We didn't really, and we still don't really have a strong economy that produces goods within the country to export outside. So the excessive government borrowing has inflated the politically well-connected banking sector that lands the state at high interest rates. So instead of the banks supporting the private sector in Lebanon and financing innovative enterprises and sustainable development and the social entrepreneurship, etc., what really gets the economic wheel to turn in the country, they were more interested in lending the state money. So the banks relied on wealthy Lebanese, and especially the diaspora, to deposit their money in Beirut, and then they would lend it to the government. and without any limitations to the government. And since the government is corrupt mostly, and a lot of money is going into waste, at some point we lost, and due to the ongoing political instabilities, of course, we lost the trust of foreign investors. People stopped wanting to invest in the country. Even the Lebanese diaspora really limited limited their remittances, the money they used to put into the banks here. So since the economy is service-based and we can't really produce anything for ourselves, we really reached at this point the following situation in Lebanon. So simply put, the inflows started to slow down despite the high interest rates, because we lost trust on the political level, and a lot of instabilities were taking place, plus the overall atmosphere in the region, which really wasn't encouraging investors. We had the inflows to slow down. This has caused the scarcity in the dollars present in the Lebanese market. And since the dollars became scarce, it weakened the Lebanese pound, which caused to push up the prices. And this led us to what we call a hyperinflation. Now, in economics, to the extent of my knowledge, there is the normal price inflation, which is an economic phenomenon and which happens regularly, and it can occur in different countries in different moments, depending on the market, the situation, etc. But what we reached in Lebanon is a hyperinflation, which is where the prices increase in severe amounts, because the Lebanese pound was blocked at its normal rate and the dollars became scarcer, so people needed to buy dollars. So this has caused, in fact, to the skyrocketing of prices. And even now, with the attempt of the central bank to go back to actually pumping in dollars in the country, in the market, to try to avoid further inflation, okay, it couldn't stop, because the black market is controlling of the Lebanese pound rate via the USD rate, and the people and the Lebanese people are just in a state of panic. So they are seeking to buy more dollars to stock, because the banks have limited their access to their own accounts. Okay, and we've become a cash-based economy. So if you want to go and purchase something that is if you want to purchase stocks as somebody who sells certain types of goods, you are not allowed, you are not trusted anymore to give a bank check in dollars or whatever, because there is no trust that the person who is receiving your check will be able to go to the bank and retrieve the money. It is practically, at the moment, such approach is practically blocked. They either defer it to your account, but you can't extract in dollars. You can only extract in Lebanese pounds, which will make you lose the value of the money you have. So we've become very cash based, and there is the huge demand for Lebanese pound is increasing, because people need Lebanese pound to go Lebanese banknotes to go and buy dollars with it in order to sustain their businesses. And this is why a lot of businesses are closing down. So at this point, we have really two options. It's either to stay on the course and let the prices and the LBP exchange rate get out of control, because at this point, $1 equals 6,000 LBP, whereas before it used to be $1 equal 1,500. So it's really changing, and at a very rapid state. And at this point, if we continue in this situation, it is very unsustainable, and we are going to run out of whatever dollars we have left within the central bank, because we are running low on liquid dollars in the central bank as well. Okay, or we go to the second option, which is we have to limit the inflation by reducing the access of Lebanese people to the Lebanese pound. So this will actually deepen the economic contraction and push more people into poverty. So it's either very chaotic, both cases will lead to further popular unrest and further people sinking into poverty and further people losing their jobs. So a lot of people and a lot of economists and decision makers are talking of different solutions. And we have a divided opinion whether we should go for the IMF or not. So this is where we got to our solutions. What's next for Lebanon with all these piled up political, economic, and social problems and issues? At this point, we have what you see on the screen, the IMF and the Conférence économique pour le développement du Liban, which we know as CEDR conferences, which was started in 2018 and was led by France in attempt to push Lebanon towards reforms in exchange for help. So I'm going to expose to you what are the 2 points of views right now. So there are people who are saying that there is no other choice for Lebanon but to go for foreign aid, whereas an opposite point of view is arguing the opposite, and they are considering that such aid and such loans is only a temporary solution. It's like a shot of morphine to a very big problem, and that it only entails more debt and more dire economic conditions. But in my on a personal level, I am in no place to really tell you if it's a good option or not. However, we're going to see together, and I will explain it to you a bit, what are the conditions of the IMF to give us the loans and the money that the government is asking for. And it will ring a bell a bit with things that I've previously stated, and in relation to corruption, to good governance, etc. So the needed reforms and conditions are: 1, to unify the official and parallel exchange rate and move to a flexible exchange rate between the Lebanese pound to the dollar. Because before in Lebanon, ever since 1993, if I'm not mistaken, till 2019, the exchange rate between Lebanese pound and the USD was fixed. It wasn't flexible. So now that it became flexible to the situation, it is very volatile. So there are a lot of opposing opinions whether we should move to a flexible exchange rate or not. A second point is to approve some of the decrees and laws presented to the parliament, including the judicial independence law, the appointment of Électricité du Liban's regulatory authority, and the board of directors, and the public procurement law. Those 3 laws are directly linked to transparency and anti-corruption guidelines. The problem in Lebanon, theoretically, we have 3 powers: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And logic states that the judiciary power should be the most independent power because it holds the 2 others accountable, and it holds any person accountable if they obstruct justice or go against the law. In Lebanon, the assignment of judges in this judiciary system is highly politicized and clientelism, and is based on clientelism. So basically, we don't have an independent judicial law. So in any case or scenario where the Lebanese people want to hold accountable a decision maker in a case of corruption or otherwise, or even in very minimal citizen-based issues, judiciary issues, we cannot really count on the objectivity of the justice justice sector in Lebanon, because it is not. It is highly politicized, and it is highly it serves specific agendas to specific political parties in the country. So the IMF is demanding and to actually include the judicial independence law, and it has been a topic of discussion lately between people and citizens, CSOs, and decision makers, and is considered as a top priority in the country. The appointment of the Électricité du Liban's regulatory authority is a law that exists since 2003 and has never been implemented. And in fact, the electricity sector on its own needs a panel discussion because it is highly corrupt. There are huge cases of corruption in its regards, and it is highly politically affiliated to a certain political party in Lebanon currently. So So just like I stated before, the Lebanese people are still suffering from an inefficient electricity sector, and the implementation of the appointment of this regulatory authority is considered to be one milestone in the path of reform. And during the Sadr negotiations, the government of Saad al-Hariri tried to present a reform regarding the electricity sector, but it was harshly criticized by power sector experts who claimed it to be empty of any scientific grounds, and that only stipulates an additional cost on the Lebanese people. And since the trust is really absent between the citizens and their government, the Lebanese people will not accept to actually pay even more money for inefficient reforms. So it is one of the really a very debated topic currently as well. And finally, the public procurement law, which is itself is a problematic, because instead of having a procurement system where you have transparent call for tenders, and which encourages the public and private partnerships and the cooperation between the private and the public sector in an efficient way, the procurement law is totally left aside by any minister who is dealing with a procurement concept or issue, and they take the decisions on a personal base or in the council of ministers, and this is actually illegal, because in the law you have the committee for tenders that opens a call for proposals for companies to apply, and for them to be chosen upon their qualifications. So this is also another topic that is recommended by both the IMF, and that is now being called for by the people, that we really need the proper public procurement laws and regulations. The third point is the closing of all illegal crossings and combating smuggling. And this is where it gets really political, because this point tackles directly the illegal crossings that are said to be led by or powered by Hezbollah towards Syria. And now that Lebanon, and they've been there for a long time now, and now with the social crisis, people are starting to really protest against it, because a lot of essential means of survival for the Lebanese people are being smuggled. So the state is not even having any, is not winning money out of it. So they are getting smuggled. And there are a lot of decision makers who accuse Hezbollah of smuggling dollars outside of the country as well to Syria. So this is a very highly debated political issue, and that has been really causing unrest on the political sphere, and it is very difficult to achieve at the moment, to really shut down those illegal crossings. Other reforms entitle fines on illegal maritime property and technical measures related to the performance standard, which really include everything related to international reserves, financial behavior, the financial behavior of the government, how they are dealing, how is the administrative mechanisms working, etc. They are, of course, included. And the austerity policies. So the IMF is asking for 0% on the investment in Lebanon, and to really limit the access of people to Lebanese pound notes, etc., to control the market. And this is causing huge ideologically based debates between, for example, Marxist oriented economists or capitalist or liberal economists. So a lot of debate is being caused whether we should go for austerity policies, whether it would really benefit the country on the long run or not. Some are saying that we should actually pump in money in the market in order to move the wheel forward for the companies. So this is also an highly economic debate that is present in the country. And the privatization of some of the state's assets. And this is another debate between left-wing approach and the right-wing approach, even though in Lebanon ideologically political ideologies are very not precise, such as in Europe or in the US or whatever, but it really shows how a lot of, for example, the Communist Party in Lebanon is currently asking for everything to be state-based, the banks, everything related to services to be state-based, whereas the IMF is asking for the privatization of some of the state's assets. If we put all these reforms that are needed aside, we have another on a parallel track, another issue, which is the overestimation of the government of what the IMF has to give us as a country. So where the government is seeking more than $10 billion in financial support, and that's on top of SAD, which gives us 11 billion in grants and loans already pledged. Okay, so SAD is already pledged, but if we do not implement the reforms needed, which are very close to IMF, we don't get any money. Okay, it is too high of a number that it is really unclear yet how much the IMF is willing to give us, and a lot of studies state that actually the IMF won't be giving Lebanon more. Not even half of what the government is asking, and a lot of issues are getting debated because there are kind of two committees discussing with the IMF. You have the government side and you have the central bank side, and politically those two groups are not really they rarely agree on anything at all, and they are very different politically. So there is this huge inability to really pinpoint whether seeking funds from the IMF is the solution or not, in opposite to seeking the support of Iran and the Eastern Bloc, if I may say, to support Lebanon out of this crisis. So what we're moving to right now is to further instability, further protests that are very different from how they started, where we started as everybody was seeing Lebanon as a huge number of people going down to the streets, protesting in a very peaceful manner, dancing the night away on patriotic songs and so on, just to take a stand against what they believe is obstructing them from having decent lives in their country. It's shifting to a more frustrated expression, a more violent one, where it involves banks and shops being put on fire. Downtown has been not totally, but partially destroyed. Specifically, the highly gentrified areas that we call Solidaire, and that who represent actually the the amount of money that was put in the restoration of Beirut after the war, and that also poses great debate. So we are not moving towards any stable grounds anytime soon, because there is also a political absence of political will, the absence of a political will and a good intention in really taking the country to a better place. We have a lot of populistic slogans, a lot of parties claiming to not be the corrupt ones, to not being the corrupt ones or the ones to blame. There is a huge amount of irresponsibility. And to conclude with, before I thank you for listening, we really are standing in the eye of a storm, and the future is not really foreseeable at the moment. We're just going by day to see how things are going, but the civic society sector, of course, is doing all their efforts in order to push for reform, to push for anti-corruption policies, and to push for sustainable solutions. But simply put, the real will for change is politically controlled, and only with a political decision we would really see any practical changes. So thank you for listening. I hope I didn't depress you much with with this reality. The only positive things is that the Lebanese people are very are experts in adaptation and survival. But I don't know how much it would this situation will persist and how much resilient they will prove to be. So if you have any questions, I'm open to answer them, and thank you.
So thank you, Mrs. Gebrael. I just want to remind everybody that you feel free to post your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, whichever works best. There is a couple of questions that I do have for you. Would you be able to elaborate more on the current situation with migrants, especially in this period of COVID-19 and, just the inability of migrants being able to go back home?
Yes, well, the migrant question has been a huge issue in Lebanon for ever since the beginning of the. You mean refugees, right? The displaced people specifically, Syrian, Palestinians, Iraqis, etc. Just so I'm clear. Okay, perfect. So. The huge numbers of refugees that have been coming to their presence was highly beneficial to the country. However, in every country, you always have those opposite standings, whether having migrants and having refugees in the country is a good thing or not, and that's another debate. But right now, with the COVID-19 situation, we've been witnessing a lot of further problems and issues that migrant communities have to deal with. To begin with, especially refugee camps and underprivileged and disadvantaged communities do not have infrastructure, do not have proper sanitary systems and so on. So before COVID-19, the situation was quite challenging. With COVID-19, it worsened because they had to struggle further to not being able to work because most of them work illegally anyways. So a lot of them were let out of their jobs and they couldn't work, so they couldn't tend to their families' needs. That's one. Two, higher rates of domestic violence were spotted by NGOs who work with GBV and child protection. It has exceeded in Lebanese and non-Lebanese communities in the country, but whenever there is more underprivileged communities, they are more prone to violence, more prone to abuse, etc. So this is a second thing they've been suffering from. Now there are a lot of projects that are foreign funded and implemented by civil society organizations that really try to implement measures adapted to the COVID-19 lockdown, while taking into consideration the need to continuously support such communities. They've been successful to a certain extent. However, in the absence of a welcoming ground on the governance level that doesn't even welcome their own citizen in a proper way, a lot of their rights are not being met, and they've been facing a lot of challenging conditions. I hope this answered a bit the question.
Thank you. So there's actually a question submitted by Antonia Carla, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. It says, in the parliament between the Muslims and Christians, which one has a bigger influence, or is there a group that is considered more powerful than the other?
Okay, now when we're talking about the Muslims and the Christians in the parliament, they are not two blocks. Simply put, they are Christian and Muslims. But within the Muslim parties, you have, for example, the Mustaqbal party, which is Sunni. It represents the majority of the Sunni population in Lebanon. You have the Hezbollah, which presents a huge number of the Shia community, and the Amal movement, which is the second Shia-based political party. On the Christian side, on the Maronite side specifically, you have the two bigger blocks, which are the freedom movement led by currently by Gebrael Basil, and the Lebanese forces movement, which is led by Samir Jaja. And now on the political level in general, Hezbollah and the Tayyar movement, the freedom movement, sorry, are the majority. They won the elections during the past elections, but it is very complex to really see how who is more powerful. Of course, the Hezbollah, they have the upper hand on the political and on the security level due to their specific status, but within the parliament you have a lot of blocs and allies that ally and then who oppose each other depending on issues. You have some issues who one party is with the other, you have another issue where they are opposite, etc. But this is it in a nutshell.
Perfect, thank you. Just another question, if you'd be able to elaborate on the prospects of Lebanon reforming institutions with foreign power competing.
It is very challenging to reform. Reforming the question of reform in Lebanon has been a topic that's been discussed for years, decades. Ever since the Lebanese war, we needed to reform the institution on the administrative level. Now, the foreign interference does not really impact the reform, but the political decision to reform. Because if we have the laws, we have the policies, we have the guidelines and the conventions. What we are lacking is a political will to implement them. And lately, a very striking study has shown that countries with the higher number of policies targeting a certain topic suffer from it the most. So, for example, in the case of corruption, we are not suffering from lack of policies or lack of tools to reform. We are lacking from their implementation. And this is where political interference, the local one before the foreign one, it is not, we cannot really say that Lebanon situation is to blame on the geopolitical conflict of interest only. It is also, there is an internal problem that needs to be solved on the political level.
Thank you. Would you be able to just specify what is the role of women in raising worries?
Okay. Women have been playing a huge role in raising worries. On two levels, for example, concretely, the civil society organizations are, we have a very strong women representation. A lot of, we have leading NGOs who are led by women and founded by women. That's on a more institutional level. On the political level, they usually pink wash a bit. So the past government, who really wasn't getting the support of the people, had the most number of women included in their ranks as ministers. On the one hand, this is very good to see women being empowered to reach for political and decision-making positions. However, they were accused by even feminist movements in the country, in specific, to have pink-washed their way into really winning the hearts of people, that they are gender sensitive and inclusive, etc. But the real role of women has been shown during the protests. Ever since October 17th, 2019, women were on the forefront of really not only raising worries on the social media level and in a soft approach. No, they were leading on the front lines of confrontations against police and rioting. Young women were at a lot of initiatives that involved the riots and destruction of public property, etc., were led by and done by women. So, and we have a very symbolic photo from the early days of the demonstration, where you have a woman kicking away a police or a soldier. I don't really remember who it was, but he was trying to stop her in a violent way, so she defended herself, and it became an emblem of the protests and what we really call a revolution, if you want to use the term. In addition to since the protest and even before, we've been demanding for further gender inclusive mechanisms and policies and approaches that secure the rights and the security of women, specifically in communities that are more prone to violence. Unfortunately, ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, we've been witnessing very high levels of domestic-based violence, and most of them is conducted against women. So we have different cases, of course, but women are the first survivors of such issues. But on the bright side, we are really seeing how Lebanese women are really affirming and taking the place they deserve and demanding change and working also for it.
Thank you. So I have I'm sorry if I'm, pronouncing this wrong. Livu Mihailencu, he said, there are certain political factions that are putting the blame on the lack of dollars and the hyperinflation on external factors such as the United States and on the private banks. Is there any ground to such accusation?
I'm not in a place to give the most correct answer on this issue. However, the situation. What is exactly meant by putting the blame on the private banks? They are putting the blame on the private banks for the scarcity of dollars. In that sense,
it does say no matter it is or it is not, it is possible that the U.S. would use the crisis in order to ask for a diminishing of the influence of Hezbollah in Lebanon in exchange for financial aid.
Well, it is an opportunity. Any common sense would state that it is an opportunity to really pressure the Hezbollah party in, or not pressuring the Hezbollah directly, and pressuring the government in taking action against the presence of the Hezbollah party in Lebanon. Definitely, it is a big opportunity. And while the USA is saying that they are not cutting dollars from Lebanon and they are supporting Lebanon in this crisis, the conditions for the donations, for the loans, indirectly highlight the a certain pressure being put on Hezbollah. And now with the Caesar Act, which is it is not really clear yet how it will impact Lebanon directly, but it does directly hit politicians and political parties that collaborate with the Syrian regime. So it is it is a big opportunity for the US and the Western countries to actually pressure for this. But the question of blaming the private sectors on the scarcity of dollars, it is the first instinct of any Lebanese person currently who is unable to access their own money and their own savings. Now, this is where there is another gray zone, because a lot of politicians and decision makers say that if we go ahead and destroy the banking sector, we would be doing the Hezbollah a favor, while others are saying the banks are restricting the rights of the Lebanese people, and they've been lying with high rates of interest without really planning for the foreseeable damage and crisis that we've reached now. So the problem in Lebanon, that any issue is highly entangled with the political spectrum and with the political side of things. So we can't really separate. But to conclude for this answer, yes, it is an opportunity. And yes, the banks are partly to be blamed, but they are not the only stakeholders in this crisis. So it's a multi-stakeholder crisis, and we should hold every accountable institution or person. We should hold them accountable and move towards change.
Thank you. Just one more question. On the IMF and austerity, does Lebanon see the situation in Greece over the last decade as a lesson?
We tend to really, in Lebanon, we tend to compare, to really put those comparison approaches to other countries who've been through similar or close situations as ours. Do we set them as lessons? Some would argue not to compare, because Lebanon is always argued to have a specific case and specific factors and specific status, etc. But definitely, when we look at Greece, there is a lot to learn and see. But on the they're more concerned right now with whatever is going to get them out of the mess they're in and they've put us in. So I hope that they are taking best practices out of previous experiences. But also, aside from Greece, the case of Venezuela is also highlighted. We hear a lot of Lebanon is going to turn into a second Venezuela, and we're gonna have the same. We're gonna have. We are already having these crises and problems. So yes, definitely, other examples of other countries are and should be lessons to us, but it's always very difficult to predict what the ultimatum will be.
Thank you. Yeah, so we just wanted to know a little bit more. As you may know, that the so this week's conference is on the anniversary of the 10th anniversary of the Arab Spring and the Eurozone crisis, and Lebanon is experiencing both. Would you be able to elaborate just more on the austerity part with the Venezuela as a scare tactic?
I'm afraid I can't really elaborate on this exactly, because I don't really have the proper expertise to give the correct answer on this. But I can really refer this question, whoever is asking this question, I can refer it to somebody who can provide the answer via email. So please do not hesitate, because I rather not give personal opinions, and wouldn't like to really give something that is not very scientifically based and evidence-based. So sorry for not replying on this question.
That's perfectly fine. Would you be able to have an opinion on the perspective of, people in the streets?
In general?
Yes.
People on the streets, it's a bit, we can't really define them as one faction, and we can't really define them as one color or as one strategy. Lebanon as a society is very diverse. It is multi-confessional, multi-ideological, different agendas, different definitions to identity and to what Lebanon is to them and what it should be. The identity crisis is highly anchored, deeply anchored in the Lebanese consciousness. So the street reflects that. It reflects this a disparity of opinions, these disparities of approaches, what we should and we shouldn't do. But what really unites and unifies the voices on the street is a common suffering, a common pain that goes back to, and I'm not being here emotional, it is really it goes beyond politics, it goes beyond rules of rationality. It is a population that is tired of years and years of oppression. In a way, it might not be direct oppression, but it is indirect through the different issues they've been suffering from. Now, if I want to be a bit more objective, a lot of people would argue, or experts would argue, that there are factions on the ground that are serving political agendas, that are serving specific interests for people in power currently, and this is not to be ignored, and this is not to be denied. In the eventually, just as I said, you have everything on the ground. Right now, people are more centered on really keeping their jobs if they have one, or finding ways to feed their children and their families. So you kind of see distracted protest, not organized such as October, because the first phase of the protest before COVID-19 were every day in every area in Lebanon. So now it is different, and you have specific factions going down the streets. Sometimes they go, sometimes they don't. It is a bit unstable, but for sure we are going towards, if no solution, no radical solution is implemented, and no trust is restored in the government, we are going towards further unstable grounds.
Thank you. So just one final question. Let me see. 1 minute. Okay. So we have a question from Livu Mikhail Lanku again. Were there any requests among the protesters to change the constitution and to leave this sectarian distribution of power for a more normal political structure of the state in order to enable real reforms with all the risks of reigniting sectarian clashes?
Yes, thank you for this question. This is a very passionate topic, abolishing the sectarian system in Lebanon and moving towards something that is more civic right-based, and that is away from sectarian feuds and division and so on. Yes, it was one of the headlines of the protests in the first phase, and if you went specifically into Beirut, because the specificity of these protests is that they were centralized. Before, when Lebanese people used to protest, specifically in times of the Syrian occupation in Lebanon, they would protest centrally in Beirut. They would go down to Beirut and gather there. So in October 17th, we had a decentralized movement. And as decentralized it was, as diversified it was with the demands. But one of the demands that was present a lot, and among the youth in particular, who refuse the sectarian divisions, who believe that Lebanese communities with their differences are more than able to live together under the rule of law without any interference from religion authorities, etc. We're demanding changing the constitution and abolishing the system and changing everything from scratch, basically. But on a parallel track, we have people who and academics, and not only like public opinion, experts and politicians and decision makers, either in power or not. So it's not only within the people who want to preserve their interest, who consider that the sectarian system is not what's wrong in the country, that you can make the best out of any system, and that a system that represents all the sects in the country, since sociologically Lebanon is divided per sects and not, for example, ethnic communities, is not that bad, but that it needs reform. And now a third movement is coming up, which is asking for federalism. So basically, to move into a federal state where every community is represented in a certain geographic area and has its autonomy under the central state. And this is now this is a course of thought that has been present in Lebanon, but in an implicit way. But since the instabilities that the protests and everything, and with all the discourses, it's a discourse that is also trying to promote itself lately.
Thank you for that. So one last question. What do you think is going to happen in Lebanon moving forward with this whole COVID-19?
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Can you please repeat, because I think my connection cut and I could hear you unclearly.
1 second. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the question was, moving forward with this, whole COVID-19 situation, how do you think Lebanon is going to basically look in terms of protests or the effects?
Okay, so during the lockdown, there was a certain fear, of course, because of the pandemic and all the consequences that resulted of you going outside in mass groups and so on. But ever since the government started to loosen up the lockdown, procedures, we've been seeing people going back to the streets and movements going back to the streets, but in more limited ways. Now, the Lebanese people are trying to resume their ordinary lives. However, we still have numbers and cases of COVID-19 in the country, and everything is pointing towards a second wave worldwide. So we don't really know how things are going to turn out to be. However, there is this argument that says that that hunger is more powerful than a pandemic. So we might see movements going to the streets and people protesting despite the risk, because they're already at risk anyways. But and we've witnessed that in some specific areas who are mostly marginalized and underprivileged, during the lockdown. We saw people not abiding with the procedures and going down to the streets, and but it was very limited and in specific areas who are really suffering from poverty and uh, and being marginalized, usually even before the situation and before the crisis and everything.
So thank you for that. If there's anything else that you would like to elaborate more on, or something that you didn't get to touch up on, you could absolutely feel free to go ahead and say what you have.
I would like to thank you first for taking the time to perceive Lebanon from a youthful scope and overview. I tried as much as I can to show you what we are experiencing, and not from a very technical point of view, but more from what we are living on a daily basis. What I would like to say is that nowadays we are all connected. All countries are connected. More have impact on others more than the others, so it's very normal. However, it's very nice to see how there is always a growing interest in the region here, and not always for negative purposes. There is specific hunger and curiosity to understand what's really going on, because sometimes media does not portray rightfully and unbiased and in unbiased ways what is happening in this area, or even in any country. So thank you for giving this margin of expression, and I hope I could really add to your knowledge or to clarify anything on the matter of Lebanon. And thank you.
Thank you. Actually, you came here very last minute, so we really appreciate your time. And you did a wonderful presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it in the audience. So again, once again, we thank you. And thanks to everyone for attending today's presentation. But before I let you go, I just would like to remind everyone that we will be having a presentation tomorrow with Ambassador Ram Aviram. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. It's going to be at 10 EDT or 17 EEST. It's going to be about the East Med between the Jordan River and the Nile, the explosive hydropolitics. We will also have another presentation featuring Dr. Konstantinos Adamides, citing Cyprus and the sub-regional security complex of the Eastern Mediterranean. That will be at 14 EDT or 21 EEST. So again, thank you to Ms. Sarah Gebrael, and thank you to the audience for taking your time. And I hope to see all of you in the next presentations. Thank you so much.
Thank you.